Law enforcers of Reddit, what is the craziest you'll never believe me story that a suspect/victim told you that actually turned out to be true? Not official cop work, but very related. I used to be an instructor for the security forces, United States Air Force cops, students in training. I was a firearms instructor, but we dealt a lot with dorm inspections and all that other fun stuff. Well, this one kid kept falling asleep in class. After many counselings and some paperwork, he said he couldn't sleep because the devil was in his dorm room. Of course we thought maybe he had some mental issues going on, but decided to get to the bottom of things. He said every night around midnight or later, he would hear a voice saying to keep his eyes shut and nothing would happen to him. He was freaked out, so he complied. A couple of the instructors decided to sit with him in his room one night and told him to go to bed like he usually does. Well, lo and behold, around 0100, the instructors heard something in the ceiling. They started freaking out a bit, but watched and waited. Next thing they know, they heard the voice, and one of the ceiling tiles was moved and something jumped down. They flipped the fax out and turned on all the lights to see what the fax was going on. Apparently this other kid had been kicked out of the military while in training. He didn't want to go home and face his family, so every night he'd go into that kid's room, scare the shit out of him, and then take some food or whatever and stretch his legs a bit. I guess he would shower during the day, but stayed up in the ceiling for the rest of the time. Needless to say, he was promptly sent home, and our freaked out student was finally able to get some much needed rest. Edit: I work grades now, and posted this before I went to bed today. A few things I want to clarify. Yes, the kid was 18. I referred to all the students as kids, since I've been in for about 15 years. This happened around the 2011/2012 time frame at the firehouse, which is what we call that set of dorms. Dude living in the ceiling would say other shit to the kid, leading him to believe he was the devil and that he'd kill his family and some other shit. And for those asking why an 18-year-old would be such a wuss, I have to say you would be surprised at the caliber of students that came through training. They don't all get weeded out in basic military training, which is sad. But a lot of them do grow into fantastic airmen and eventually non-commissioned officers. So, dispatch advice: my partner and I have a 911 call, where the caller advised there is a pilot who parked a plane in his yard and then went to the nearby bar. Dispatch advises the caller doesn't speak conversational English and the call was translated via a translation service. Knowing the address is on a lake, I assume there is a mistranslation. Someone probably drove a boat up to his dock and went to the bar. Partner calls me. He's on the sheeter, and it's going to be a minute. He assumes the same thing regarding translation that I do. That's cool. I arrived first. Holy shit, it's an actual plane. In his driveway. Specifically a seaplane. Apparently it was driven up the boat ramp, turned off into his driveway, and shut down. I called my partner. Yeah. You need to come here and see this sheet. Go to the bar. Who owns the plane? Drunk guy does. Apparently he was there to visit his friend, landed on the lake, and taxied to his friend's driveway. Except he got addresses mixed up apparently. And now he's drunk, so I don't want him to move the plane. Turns out planes are light and he pushed it to the correct driveway. Obligatory: not me, but a close family friend. So I'm patrolling beach tourist destination, and it's about 2 AM, so I'm on the lookout for drunk drivers. There's a guy swerving a little bit up the road. He was on a back road and there was nobody else around. I decided to check it out. Flip on the lights and the guy pulls over immediately. I start chatting with the guy and he's slurring his words. Cop, where are you coming from? Guy, just heading back to my hotel from the beach. Cop, any reason why you're swerving? Guy, I'm on some medication from a surgery I recently had, and I'm pretty tired. So I'm thinking, okay buddy. I grab his license and registration, I run it, and it comes back clean. I took a look in his backseat with my flashlight on the way back. Not only are there 230 packs of beer in the backseat, the floor is absolutely littered with empty beer cans. Cop, so what's with all the beer in the back? Guy, well, my neighbor really likes that brand of beer, and he was house sitting for us, so we are bringing some back to him as a gift. Cop, So what's with all the empty beer cans on the floor? Guy, well, while we were at the beach the other day we saw a part of the beach that was trashed. I couldn't leave the beach like that. Cop, alright buddy, you need to step out of the car. So I make him take a breathalyzer, and he blows 0.000. So I made him blow again, 0.000. Keep in mind this guy is slurring his words left and right. So I ask him if I can take him back to the hotel, and I'll drive his wife back to pick up his car. He agrees. I got to the hotel and the wife was worried sick because he had been out so late. The wife confirms that he's on medication. He goes to sleep, and as the wife and I are walking out, I start questioning her. Cop, I saw a bunch of empty beer cans in the back seat. Does he drink a lot? Woman, oh no, he insisted we spend an hour of our beach trip cleaning up the beach. He wanted to drop off the cans at the recycling center before we went back home. He doesn't drink at all. Cop, interesting. There were 2 cases of beer in the back seat. Woman, oh yes, my neighbor absolutely loves beer. Can't get it where we are from. Easily the most surprised I've ever been. Edit, it was not the medication making him swerve. He was very tired. Hence why he was driven back to the hotel and not arrested. The medication only made him slur his speech. Yes, it was Jungling. These are not my pants. As we were cruising around town we spotted a guy, Jim, wanted for questioning in relation to breaching an intervention order. He was in the passenger seat of a car with some other guy we didn't know, Bob. We pull the car over, arrest Jim and put him in the back of our car. As we're searching his car and Bob, Jim was one of our local drug dealers, I find a point of ice in Bob's pocket. So I'm telling Bob he's under arrest for drugs, and he looks me dead in the eye and says, "Officer, I swear to God, these are not my pants." I almost laughed in his face. You can't be serious. That's the best you can come up with. But again he said, "I swear to God, these are not my pants and that's not my drugs." Apparently Jim and Bob had a big night drinking at Jim's house and Bob had misplaced his pants before passing out. When they woke up Bob grabbed the first pair of jeans he found and drove Jim into town for some Macca's totally unaware of the drug in his pocket. A likely story, if I ever heard one. So I open up our car and ask Jim, "Are they your pants?" "Yeah they are." He couldn't find his own. "Can you tell me about anything that was in those pants?" "Oh shit. Yeah, the point is that I didn't smoke yesterday." Jim made full admissions to owning both the pants and the drugs, while Bob was happily free to go. Damn. I'm super late to the game, but here it is. I went to a report of a mentally disturbed person who called the police reporting that the devil called and told him to kill people on the street and then kill himself. I checked his previous police files, and he had a massive history of mental health issues. He was taken to the mental ward many times, and was diagnosed with a form of paranoid schizoaffective disorder. Anyways, my partner and I show up, and talk to the guy. He's sweating bullets, eyes darting around, trembling and totally terrified. He explains that for the last 6 years, the devil calls him nightly via telephone, and then when he calls for help, the police take him to the mental institute. He says the devil tells him to kill people then kill himself. As we are about to call our mental health unit to come talk to him, the phone rings. My partner answers the phone at the guy's request. Guess what? Some faking bastard was using a voice changer and pranking this dude with mental health issues for years pretending to be the devil. I can't tell you how surreal that moment was. The poor man's face changes, kind of like he's finally been vindicated, and he knows it's not just in his head. So we investigated that pranker and eventually charged him. The guy who had called was so freaking happy. I know this is a little late, but this is a good one. I was a detective for a few years, assigned to violent crimes investigations. I got called in one night for a male victim that literally was dumped out of a vehicle at the entrance to the emergency room. He had been shot in the side right around the hip area with a shotgun, but was conscious and alert. While talking to him, he wouldn't give any information whatsoever about his name or anything. While in the emergency room, the doctor informed me that when they cut his pants off he had a significant amount of crack in his pocket. He initially stuck to his story and once discharged about a week later he was arrested for the crack. This is where the story takes the turn. He immediately dropped the "those aren't my pants" story, which is more common than anyone could imagine, but still wouldn't give any more information about what happened. He did finally give all his personal information. He was from out of state and couldn't make bond, so after sitting in jail for about 4 months, he finally decided he wanted to talk about what happened. Turns out on the night he was shot, he and some of his associates decided they were going to rob a known drug dealer. To achieve this, they dressed up as federal agents with battle dress uniform pants, full uniform style shirts and badges. When they got to the house, they announced they were police, and as soon as he grabbed the glass door, the guy on the inside swung open the main door and fired a shotgun through the outer door, striking him. Everyone ran back to the car, jumped in, and on the way, one of the other guys gave him clothes to put on so that he didn't show up at the hospital with a uniform style outfit. Every piece of his story was verified through the investigation, to include the drug dealer had not replaced his glass door, and it was still shattered. I work in air pollution control. One of our actual officers got an anonymous complaint call through the tip line about a body shop that didn't have the right equipment, was operating without a permit, etc. Meet the officer out there to inspect the place and see what's up. As I'm pulling in, the shop's yard is a mess. Random wrecked cars all over the place, bits and pieces of engines and such under tarps, or just casually laying on a pallet. There's a small pile of tires in one corner. All it's missing is a chained up Doberman and a razor wire fence. I was glad I had an officer along. We walk into the shop proper, and it's even more cluttered than the yard. There's bits and pieces of at least 3 different cars in old milk crates, and 2 different vehicles in various states of disassembly on the shop floor. Tell the owner why we're there, and he's super confused. Says he has a paint booth that he loans out to a buddy who does his painting for him, but he doesn't do very much work. We go through the whole speech about changing the filters and such, and the guy is even more confused looking. He swears he just bought new filters for the thing. They're quite expensive, and he says again that he doesn't do all that much paint work. I'm not buying it given the state of the shop and the yard, so I ask to see the booth. He walks us into another building, and there's an absolutely beautiful paint booth in there. Everything is clean, and the filters are in good shape. He's got the right kind of paint guns, all his containers are covered, and the ventilation is hooked up properly. There's not the faintest whiff of paint, let alone some sort of odor worth calling the tip line to complain about. I couldn't find anything to cite as a violation, and there wasn't even anything to warn him about. One of the better body shops I've ever been in as far as housekeeping goes. Now we are all confused. The officer asks the guy if anyone from any other agency had been out to visit lately. The guy says no. Then he asks if maybe he fired someone lately, since sometimes former employees who get fired will call to complain and try to get their old boss in trouble. Again the guy says no, just him and his dad that work in the shop, and his buddy that comes to paint. We all scratch our heads trying to figure out who called in the complaint, because there's nothing wrong here. On the way out, the officer casually remarks that he'd like to get his hands on a Camaro like that one over there. That's when the light bulb went off. Turns out the owner of the Camaro was unhappy with the speed of progress on his car. The shop owner had been working on it for free as a favor and had gotten bogged down with other work, so he hadn't had a chance to finish it. They had apparently argued about it a few days before we got the call, and the rest is history. It's not crazy, but it was very unbelievable until I found he was being honest. I contacted a guy walking on the wrong side of the road because he was carrying a backpack, and when I looked at him, he gave me the oh shit look. I find out he's on parole and currently awaiting trial for burglary. I search his bag and locate an ID, a computer and a wallet with the cash and cards still in the wallet. Obviously he stole all this, and I read him his rights to ask him some questions. He claims he was walking to the law enforcement center to turn in it. Yeah right. I thought to myself, sure you were, buddy. He tells me he was walking back from eating at a shelter and just found all these belongings next to the park and wanted to turn them in. Anyway, I take all his information and write it up because there are no reports from the person on the idea of theft or anything, and I deter the property. Well, about 4 hours later I get a call from another officer. He asks me if I took a computer and other items. I told him yes, and he said that his victim, a female, had her boyfriend take her belongings and threw them out the window at the park. I started laughing and told him the story of my guy. This is probably one of the few times I have run into a somewhat innocent person with a crazy story that was true. Don't fool yourself though, he was walking away from where the police station was, not towards it. Get a complaint of a burglary from a guy we deal with from time to time who has schizophrenia. Guy says someone broke into his house and stole like $0.38 in change from his coffee table, 2 slices of cheese from his fridge, and 2 Tylenol gel caps. The interior of the guy's house looks like something off of a hoarder show, so I ignore the guy and let him fill out a statement form for an initial report that I plan to bury in a file because he's obviously having problems with not taking his psych meds. 2 weeks later he calls panicking and gets dispatched back out to his house. This time he's missing around $0.72 from his coffee table, a can of Vienna sausages, and 3 doses of his prescription heart medication. Same thing, I'll let him rant and rave about being robbed, and he asks repeatedly what he can do to stop this from happening. I give him a half-assed answer like that he should invest in cameras for his house, take his statement and leave. Another week passes and gets sent out a 3rd time. Same random items missing. Spare change, a fishing lure, and half of a bologna sandwich from his fridge. This time he's smiling and keeps saying we got the some beach this time. He pulls back a blanket from beside his recliner and it's a monitor attached to 6 or 7 cameras around the inside of the house. Pulls up the video and sure enough a guy slides his kitchen window open and lets himself in. He takes loose change from the coffee table, steals 1 fishing lure, and takes a bite out of the dude's sandwich in the fridge before opening the fridge back up and taking half of the sandwich. Turns out to be another schizophrenic that lives down the road from him. Not law enforcement, but still good stories. I used to be an emergency medical technicians, and at the house we had a guy who'd been doing it for 15 years or so. He had some stories. The one that sticks out: they get a call for a trapped child, that's it. No further explanation, just an address and hang up. Cops, fire trucks, ambulances, rescue squads all roll up. Mom answered the door, seemed embarrassed and disheveled. Told them in the bathroom her son had faked the bathtub faucet and had become stuck inside. I'll repeat that: her son had faked the bathtub faucet and had gotten stuck inside. They had to cut the pipe out of the wall. They cut 5 feet up to try and prevent any heat transfer to his dung. The moment they started cutting, he freaked out, so they stopped. One of the guys goes, "We didn't nick you, buddy, did we?" High five if we did. They get him in the ambulance and drape him with a sheet, roll him into the emergency room with what looks like the biggest goddamn erection ever. They had to hold the pipe while they wheeled him in, so it looked like 2 emergency medical technicians were holding this mondo dung. The other, a doc I knew, had worked in the emergency room for 30 years. One of his nurses had been there for 25 of them. She came up to him and went, "You need to see this." Guy fell asleep with his testicles in the hole of a barbell. They swelled up and were now stuck. Guy waddled into the emergency room clutching a bit under his sack. Went to sit down, but the trig nurse stopped him. Yes, you, come on through." They had to call the fire department to use the auto extrication kit. So they saw into this barbell. Sparks were flying, and to reduce heat they were dumping water. Under the curtain you can see sparks from the metal. The guy is screaming in terror, and you hear the sound of metal cutting metal. All the patients in the emergency room freaked out. Several attempted to run away. Nurses, PAs, docs, and techs had to play goalie and ensure everyone that it was okay. It was a medical situation in the room. Torture wasn't happening. I work loss prevention for a major retailer. Working limited partnership one day and I see a juvenile female selecting multiple items without looking at price. Something that is a cue to me to start watching closely. She takes the cosmetics out of the packaging and then goes into the fitting room with one shirt. I get another officer to watch the cameras and I make my way out to the floor. The female exits and I check the stall. Nothing in there except a shirt. I head out to the entrance and wait for her to exit. As soon as she exits I identify myself and ask her to return. The tears started running down her face and she begged me not to call the police or her mom. Told her that I would at least have to contact her mom. I call her mother and she says she is disabled and cannot get out of bed. I ask if there is anyone else that can pick her up and she sends a family friend. During the interview with the female, she said she is having a really hard time and that she was really sorry. Giving her the benefit of the doubt, I decide not to charge her on the grounds that she remains trespassed and doesn't get into trouble with any other retailer. She agrees. A few days later I got an envelope with a letter. It says thank you and again how sorry she is. She explained the reason she took the cosmetics is because her mother has stage 4 cancer and only has weeks to live and couldn't bring herself to ask for money from her mother because she is so sick and very broke. It honestly broke my heart. I framed the letter and kept it in my office as a reminder not to judge people quickly. Make all new hires read it as well. Every one of them has the same who cut the onions in here look. I have a not Leo, but similar though from the other side story. Traveling to Australia and at customs, they swab my luggage and find traces of pot. At the time I'm a 20-something guy with long hair traveling alone. A friendly customs fellow starts talking to me and gives me the spiel. They don't care if I smoke, just that I'm not bringing any, all that jazz. I'm freaking out while being politely interrogated at customs on the other side of the world. Mind racing. Will I be turned away and have to go home? Will I be detained or jailed, strip searched? I have no clue what Australian law has to say about drug trafficking, but it's probably bad. I never smoked, not even once, and still don't. I've dabbled slightly with legalization and all where I live, but it just makes me incredibly dizzy even at very low dose amounts, both vaping and 1 to 2 little 4mg edibles. Don't really drink either, save for at my best friend's wedding as the best man. Something about not having my wits about me really bothers me. But anyways, so here I'm freaking out. The poster child, I'm sure, especially to some foreign guys probably familiar with American TV culture, of an American pothead, based on appearance stereotypes. And it suddenly dawned on me. It was my parents' suitcase I was borrowing for the trip. He gave me this kinda incredulous look, but we chatted a bit more. They searched my luggage more thoroughly, and I went on my way. I'm sure they thought I must have gotten through with something, and they just didn't bother to find it. But nope, it really was someone else's suitcase, and my parents at that. Telling this one third hand and 30 years later, so bear with me if the details are fuzzy. My mom had a friend, Mary, who owned an old VW Beetle. To those not in the know, those things had the engine in the back and a big trunk in front. One day, the circus came to town. As part of the grand arrival, the elephants are paraded from the train station to the downtown market for a meal and photo opus. Mary just happens to be driving down the street while the elephants are making their walk. One of the elephants gets a little out of control and decides to sit on her car. The front of the car was smooshed in, but it was still drivable. Couldn't get it fixed right away. I have seen pictures of the elephant sitting on the car, so I know it happened. A few days later, Mary is driving on a highway and a massive 15-car loop occurs right in front of her. Her car wasn't involved, but she was still stuck there until the highway gets cleared. As she's waiting, a cop is going down the line with all the drivers asking them questions. He finally gets to her car and asks why she didn't stop in time. She claims she did stop in time. Cop looks at her car and doesn't believe her. Mary tells the cop about the elephant and now he thinks she's delusional. Not sure how long it took her to convince him. I was on foot patrol at the Lincoln Memorial when I received a call on the radio to meet with a woman concerning her kidnapping. As soon as I saw her from 100 yards away, I could tell she was a 10 to 96 mental subject. She was dressed inappropriately for the time of year. Her clothes were unusual and mismatched. Many homeless people wear all of their clothes because they have nowhere to keep them. Her hair was very disheveled. She proceeded to tell me that she had been kidnapped from the streets of DC the night before, but she escaped and made her way back. She told me she was kidnapped by 33rd degree Masons under the orders of Jess Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition. She told me she jumped out of the car in Virginia and hitchhiked back into DC. While I was taking her statement, a detective showed up. We found out she jumped out of the car at a convenience store. The detective went out to the convenience store and found out she had indeed been there the night before. Apparently, some frat boys thought it would be funny to pick up a homeless woman and take her back to the house for a party. When she started talking to them about Masonic conspiracies, they decided to mess with her. She freaked out, and they dumped her at the convenience store in the middle of the night. I worked as a customs officer, not the front line. I dealt with back-end stuff, cameras mainly. Sometimes I'd help the other techs who dealt with radio/swab machines. Not my core role, but hey, friendly work environment. The swab machines occasionally need recalibration. We do this with a calibration liquid. Measure a drop onto the swab, know the expected value, and put it in the machine. Adjust as necessary. Bit more to it than that, but good enough. Anyways, we needed to clean out the fridge they were stored in. Move things around, dispose of expired stuff. I had a flight that afternoon to travel to another site for work. I had handled calibration substances for pretty much every drug and explosive known to mankind. Forgot to wash my hands. As I was not actively doing work at the time, I wasn't a customs officer at this moment, just a traveler. Got randomly selected for the swabbing. The machine just about had an aneurysm, if it's possible for a machine to do. Lights. Warnings. Startled security guard. So, I forgot to wash my hands after handling the calibration substances for the swab machines at the office earlier. End result, I missed my flight. Calls to managers and regional managers. Got it all sorted out. New policy was that no one was allowed to handle the calibration substances if they had a flight in the next 24 hours. This happened to me about 8 years ago. I was 21 and drinking some beer with some buddies who hadn't come of age yet. They were 19 and 20. They couldn't drive as they got pretty hammered, but I wasn't drinking much, so I told them I would drive them home in their car and would have a different friend, not with us, drive me home. We all agreed and hopped in the car. There were some leftover beer cans in the trunk along with a half-empty bottle of vodka. About 10 minutes into the drive, a cop starts telling me. I panicked a little, but I wasn't drunk, so I kept driving like all is well. 5 minutes pass, and this cop is still on my tail. I get to a stoplight and turn right and the lights come on behind me. Fuck. My friends in the backseat are totally hammered, and now also freaking out. I tell them to shut the hell up, and let me talk. We pull into a car wash that was closed, and out of nowhere, I shit you not, like 20 more cop cars blazing out of nowhere. It's a small town, so a few bored cops generally pull in when they see someone get pulled over, I guess out of boredom or backup. But 20? I'm sweating hard and roll down the window and ask what's going on. The guy tells us all to get out and ask to search the car. I look back at my friend, who is the owner, and he mumbles okay. The cops start going through everything and pops the trunk, sees the liquor and doesn't react. So now I've got two drunk and scared people, and I'm ready to shit my pants, and we're all outside of the car with fucking guns pointed at us. Out of nowhere I grow some balls and start demanding answers. Turns out, a vehicle matching our description along with 3 people in it matching our description just robbed a store down the road. Same color car and everything. Once they realize there's no merchandise in the car, the cop apologizes. Then the drunk kids and beer and vodka dawned on him. Out of sheer embarrassment for the overkill pulling us over, he asks if I'm sober, and I say yes, so he lets us go. No questions asked about the alcohol or underage drinking. Crazy shit. Late but whatever, everyone is saying it. Back in my teenage years, a lot of us would drive around in groups after we got our licenses, visiting people's houses, or generally just passing the time doing whatever. This specific day we had decided to go to a massive, football field-sized, abandoned factory in a nearby suburb. We've already previously gone into it and explored several times, but this was broad daylight, and we went around to the front side next to the road with no plans of sneaking in. The entire factory was poorly fenced off from the road, and we all parked next to it and chilled there for a bit, just looking at it and bullshitted for a while. It was a back road that led to a nowhere neighborhood, so we just parked along the side and looked at the place, explaining it to a few people who didn't come with us to explore. I think there were about 10 of us in 3 cars. For some reason a cop pulls up next to one of my buddy's cars, walks out and starts talking to him. Ask the general questions. What are you doing here? Etc. etc. During this conversation, that was going nowhere, because we were still on public property doing nothing wrong, he spotted my friend's small pouch /bag in the backseat of his car. There were needles sticking out of it in several places, and while we weren't exactly sketchy looking, a bunch of teens in a county that has a meth/heroin problem certainly raises his suspicion. 5 seconds later he's barking orders for everyone to stand next to the fence and my friend to stand alone next to his car while he's on his radio shouting things about backup and codes. Oh boy, here we go. 2 more cop cars arrived in what felt like seconds and the whole thing started getting spicy. But, in what had to be less than 2 minutes, that cop started feeling real bad for ignoring the explanations of a kid about his insulin bag for his diabetes. Looking back, it was a pretty hilarious situation, since almost nobody in that group drank or did drugs, yet, I think he ended up apologizing to us before telling us to get the facts out. I was in law enforcement in the Los Angeles area in the early 1990s. One of my first call-outs was to a cockfighting ring in East Los Angeles. It was pretty standard in this area. Multiple units, helicopters, an immigration bus, dozens of arrests, Polaroids of gang tattoos, etc. The next day my partner and I get a cruelty to animals call-out to the same address. We figure it's a rollover from all the calls the previous day, but we go to check it out. Park the radio car at the end of the driveway of the house next door to where we were the day before, and start walking down the narrow driveway toward an old split-door barn/garage at the back of the property. The top half of one door is open, and we can faintly hear a radio, so we call out, announcing our presence. No answer. We approach and call out again. No answer. We now realize there is someone in the garage, so we both draw our sidearms and approach in a combat stance. When we get to the door, we announce once more our presence, but we can now see through the darkness a guy standing on a stepladder with his pants around his ankles. My partner opens the bottom half of the barn door to gain entry and a better visual and demands the man come down and show his hands. He says to us, "I'll be there in a minute," while still rhythmically moving. We repeat our request, but now the situation is beginning to dawn on both of us. Long story short, as we're arresting this guy for having intercourse with his horse, his wife comes out from the back of the house behind us yelling at him, "I told you that's not right," and a few other statements as we loaded him into our unit for transport. What struck me as most odd was his completely calm demeanor during our 20-minute drive to our substation, while he very eloquently and logically explained to us how much he and his horse cared for each other. Disturbingly, but not surprisingly, his wife posted bail that evening. I was driving in the 80s, one of those old school wood panel Jeep Grand Cherokees. I was in New England, narrow windy roads with oak trees and stone walls along the sides. Any case, the pedal dropped to the floor under my foot, and the car began to accelerate wildly. I could brake, but I couldn't stop accelerating. I tried to turn off the key, but the car kept running. I was barely able to keep the car on the road. So, as you can imagine, I picked up a nice police escort and led them all over hell and tarnation at high speeds. Frankly, I'm lucky I survived. In the end, the car sputtered out, likely the result of the switched off ignition. I got out of the car in tremendous relief, only to find policemen with guns drawn demanding that I lie on the ground with my arms extended. I told them it wasn't my fault. I told them that the car just took off and I couldn't stop it. I told them that I was the victim in all of this. They, of course, felt that I was trying to evade responsibility for leading them all over the place in a deadly high-speed car chase. Took a while, but I got them to look under the hood. A mechanic had left a tool with a rubber handle. The heat from the engine had softened the handle to the point that it seized the accelerator cable, most likely when I was giving it some real gas to get it going. I was a teenager. The cops let me go, begrudgingly, with some comments about how I should handle my upcoming discussion with the mechanic. The Squeegee Aficionado, 1998, Denver metro suburb, Colorado. I had just been turned loose by my FTO, field training officer, on routine patrol solo. Very early in the morning, I spotted a Honda Civic parked behind a middle school. Schools are not trespassing after hours, so I wheel around to take a look as there's usually no vehicles in this particular lot at that time of day. Vehicle is occupied, the windows somewhat foggy even from a distance. It was a chilly night. I'm sure they've seen me take an interest as I turn the corner onto the property. I see a flurry of activity begin inside. This flurry of activity looks like people trying to put their clothes back on quickly in the dark, and is something most who've worked patrol at night have seen before. I stop at the entrance/exit to the parking lot as the Civic has to pass by me to leave, and I wanted to contact them and make sure everything is at least okay and perfectly canny. I casually signal, hand up to indicate stop, please, as the vehicle is heading toward the exit onto the street. The windshield was still foggy, but the driver had partially wiped the inside of the windshield to remove the condensation. As he pulls alongside me, nose to tail, driver's side window to driver's side window, there are a dozen different names for it. I realize it's the custodian for the school, but in a different car than I've seen him driving. I relax as I know him well enough, and he seemed alright, but still. I've talked with this guy and we'd even joked around a bit as there's fuck all else to do some nights on third shift. He's belted in, she's belted in, but not looking at me, her face partially obscured by her hair, the angle of the parking lot lighting, vehicle positioning, and the foggy windshield. But I know what's going on here, and realize that he's probably mortified at being caught like this, late at night, and on school grounds in a seemingly compromised state. A compromised state that could possibly result in serious repercussions for him, and a fair amount of ribbing for me were I to have to file a report or charges on this contact. I'm also a human, and can neither confirm nor deny allegations of any personal late night trying myself in deserted school parking lots when I was younger. I'm going to keep this short and sweet as I have better things to do, and all now appears to be in order. Hey Blatty. Hey custodian. Late night, eh? Yeah. There was something odd in his cadence, his tone and timbre sounding perfectly normal, but I ascribed this to his being caught banging someone in his car on school grounds after hours, rather than to who he was actually banging. Nothing to see here, officer. I had just washed my cruiser's windshield inside and out. I kept a cheapo gas station squeegee to really get into the corners, and I still had it sitting on my gig bag next to me in the passenger seat. Not thinking, and assuming I knew the guy well enough to joke with him, I hold up my squeegee and say need to borrow mine, indicating generally in the direction of his windshield. The look on his face rapidly progressed from worried and annoyed to puzzled and something like disgust. I could see him assess my handheld window wiper as he said, "No thanks man, I'm good. No worries, you two have a good night." The thought occurred to me that the look in his eyes might have been professional auteur as he rolled up the window and drove off. It was only then that I realized that his passenger was in fact a very real looking blow up doll. Too late. Now I have questions. On my way through a residential neighborhood one night going to a past theft call from the convenience store. Drive past a woman on a bike with no lights. Keep going. A second later I go past a guy on a bike with no lights, pulling a lawnmower with some ropes. Safe exit, backlog the theft call, flip around and light the dude up. Get out and recognize the guy as a local crackhead with a decent record of thefts and property crimes. Go, you know why I stopped you? Yes sir, but some guy just gave it to me for free. Right, sure. Some random dude in a dead quiet neighborhood was out giving away free lawnmowers at midnight. Ask him where he got it from. He gives me the most vague set of directions of all time. Go make a few turns, go halfway down a street, and look for a house with a car and a truck in the driveway. So backup gets there and stays with the guy, and I go make a half-assed attempt to find this non-existent free mower giver. Find the possible street, spot at least a dozen houses with a car and a truck parked in front, and pick one at random. That seems to be vaguely the area he described. Go pound on the door. Guy finally comes out. By any chance, did you just give away a free lawnmower a minute ago? Actually officer, I did. My wife got tired of me using the old mower and ordered me to get rid of it. So I pushed it out to the curb and some random guy rode up and asked to have it, then rode off that away. drive back and apologize to the guy for actually not stealing something for once. Every time I ran into him after that I'd ask if he'd found any more free lawn mowers. There's a basic rule to reality that the more bizarre and hokey the story, the more likely it's actually not bullshit. My buddy, herein, Chuck, who's a statue in Maine, told me this one possibly saved the guy's life. Chuck pulled a dude over right around 10 to 11 one night for failure to stop or something minor. Guy is nervous and sweating. Opens his glove compartment, and there's a sizable bag of a white powder. The guy bursts into tears and keeps repeating, "It's powdered sugar, man. I promise it's powdered sugar." Chuck gets him out of the car, cuffs on, searches him, nothing of note, goes to inspect the baggie, opens it up, and feels a little bit of it with his fingers, feels strange, then puts just a little on his tongue, looks at the guy and he says out loud, "It is powdered sugar." Apparently this guy had borrowed money from a guy and wanted to make it back quick because he was receiving threats. He had nothing of note to sell, so he decided to rebag some confectionery sugar and try to pawn it as coke. Chuck tells the guy that this is incredibly stupid and he could very well be killed if he sells it to the wrong person. Bonus, he agreed to go down to the local station and make a report of being threatened by the guy he borrowed money from. The police paid the guy a visit and told him to knock it off. Chuck said he made a follow-up a while later, and the guy had paid his buddy back and everything was okay. One night my group of friends and I are hanging out at the empty parking lot of a driving range in the Bay Area that overlooks one of the bridges and a good portion of the bay. Amazing view at night, by the way. So there were 9 to 10 of us. 2 subs full of people, drinks, blankets, and firewood. We were planning on having a bonfire in Half Moon Bay, but ended up getting chased out of town by some gang guys about an hour prior. That's another great story, if anyone wants to hear it, lol. So we're there for a good 40 minutes drinking, dancing and having an overall awesome night for a bunch of 16 to 17-year-olds. We had a couple bottles of tequila and Smirnoff Green Apple on the hood of my car along with a bunch of red cups and a mix of chasers we were using when all of a sudden we saw lights coming our way from about a 1/4 mile away. "Oh seat cops," someone yells. So we throw the bottles in the backseat of one of the cars and hide them under blankets. Officer Smith pulls up and shines the light on us. He asks what we are doing, and we give the usual nothing, just hanging listening to music. "Okay," he says, and starts looking at all of us, and asks and starts figuring us out. A bunch of Latino kids in a parking lot of a mostly white town doesn't look suspicious at all, lol. First he asks where they were from. Right on the other side of the bridge, we tell him. So he asks about all the cups and sodas, and asks if we are drinking. No, we all respond. He starts looking through the cars a little bit and finds the bottles. He then questions the limes and salt we have on the hood of the car. "What's this for then?" "We like to flavor our soda," my friend Jules responded. He looks at her with a smirk I'll never forget, and with the stern voice yells, "Okay, everyone sit your ass down on the ground of get your I.Ds out." Oh no, we're faked. First he calls for backup, and then starts checking us all. About half didn't have I.Ds, so he had to write names and addresses down. He asks whose cars these are, and if the drivers had been drinking. Myself and the other driver had possibly drunk the most at that point, so we're really faked. He's talking about us being arrested, driving under the influence, and parents picking us up and all that. When he's on to the 3rd or 4th person, one of my best friends stands up and yells, Dan Smith, is that you?" He looks up at him and starts to say who the fuck, and then in one of the greatest moments of my life, his eyes light up and says, "It's me, Timmy Jr., Tim's son." The officer's eyes light up just as bright and says, "Holy shit, Timmy. Last time I saw you, you were this tall, near waist level. How are you, man? How's your daddy CT?" Everyone's looked at each other with a what the fuck's face, and confused as we could be. They talk for about 5 minutes and his backup shows up within that time. Turns out my friend's dad had worked the night shift patrolling the local NASA building with this guy when they were in the Air Force together. Dude goes from 100 to 0 and says any friend of Tim is cool with me. He asks us if we are sober enough to drive. At that point I'm beyond sober in astonishment, lol. He ends up escorting us back to the highway as we had no smartphones back in 2005 to navigate our way, lol. My buddy asks for him not to mention this if and when he sees his dad in the future. We drive back across the bridge and celebrate having Tommy as a friend. That was honestly one of the funnest nights of my life. Thanks for letting me share it. All names were changed in this story by the way, and I'm also on mobile, sorry. The night I met the devil incarnate on a dark road. I'm not a Leo. In my early 20s I was a security contractor. I was driving home. It was about 11:30 p.m. raining and I had turned down the 800 meters long road that had no lights, no houses, no people, just fields and a rubbish dump. At least 1.5 km from any housing or public transport. It wasn't just raining, it was pouring. I was driving at a crawl when about 300 meters down the road something appeared in front of my car. I swerved, narrowly missing it. I reverse and stop next to this thing. I shine my mag light through my window onto it. It was a girl, early 20s, totally soaked through, scratching at her face and muttering incoherently. I roll down my passenger side window. Driver's seat is on the right in Norse. We drive on the left side of the road and ask her if she needs help, for me to call anyone or take her somewhere. She starts screaming, "Leave me alone. I am the devil," over and over again, then sits down on the ground holding her face, rocking back and forth, repeating the words. I take that as a no. I call the cops, and after explaining the what and where, they tell me to stay in my car, lock the doors, do not let her in, or even get close, and that they will have a car there within minutes. I finish the call with them, and look back to the passenger side. She's gone. I look to the right and she's right there at my window staring at me. I can't even begin to describe the look she gave me other than evil. I'm not religious and barely spiritual. This was a pretty terrifying experience though. I mainly felt bad for the girl as she must have been pretty messed up. Seeing there was nothing else I could do other than maybe get a broken window / attacked by the devil, I noped out of there. Never heard back from the popo about it. Not a cop. Pulled over by one. Short story as we drove something like 6 to 7 hours away to a wedding in upstate New York. Now driving back to the DC area in the wee hours of the night. We are getting closer to home, and I have to pee. We are only 15 minutes from the house. I'm doing 15 over. Yeah, I get pulled over. I'm exhausted. Not so tired that I was in danger of falling asleep, just physically exhausted. The girlfriend, however, passed out drunk in the passenger seat. We managed to wake her up for the customary ID and all that, and she passed out again. Car reeks of alcohol. Anyway, he gets me out and makes me do the full driving under the influence tests. Touch your nose, walk the line, and all that. I can barely do any of it, but I swear I have not been drinking. No dice. I finally tell him something like, "Are you going to breathe me, or what?" He gets the thing, and I blow it. I will always remember the scene. He's just looking at it intently. I look at him and ask, "Well?" And he shoves it in my face. 0.00 he mumbles, walks back to his car, writes me a ticket for 65 plus, and tells me to go home. As soon as I got home I opened the door and pissed in my driveway. Happened to me that I'm not a cop. A couple years ago my wife and her friends went out to a party and got wasted and called me to pick them up around 3 in the morning. I pick them up and they are completely wasted. As I'm driving them home I see a cop start following me. Now I drove slowly and did all the full stops to avoid this. He pulls me over and as soon as he gets to my window he immediately tells me to get out of the car and put my hands on the hood. He searches for me. I'm clean and asks me if I know why he pulled me over. I say I have no clue and that's when he points to my back door and I see this girl's white sweater dragging onto the street. She had her sweater caught on my door from the outside. I tell him that they are coming from a party and I'm dropping them off. He then tells me my car reeks of liquor and if I was drinking that night. I tell him no and that my car has no liquor in it, so he's lying. He calls for backup. 2 more cop cars show up and then he has me smell the inside of my car and it reeks of liquor. Now I feel stupid and kind of nervous. He makes me do a sobriety test and I pass. Then he makes me do a breathalyzer and I pass again. He then asks me why does my car smell like liquor and again I tell him I have no clue, I'm just dropping them off. He then asks the girls and they confess to spilling a whole bottle of Henny just as I got pulled over in my back seat. One of the other cops just looks at me and tells me if I ever waste another bottle of Henny like that he will personally arrest me. I laugh and they let me go and all is well. Basically got pulled over because it looked like I kidnapped a girl since a sweater was dragging on the street, and then my car reeked a lot of liquor even though I didn't even drink that day. I was on a ride along with my neighbor to a domestic call. On 100 of these calls the usual story is that someone gets mad and starts hitting someone else. This one was different. The high school age kids found the parents' stash of cocaine and flushed it down the toilet. Parents return and find that their stash is gone and ask the kids what's up, and they tell them. Parents find the kids' stash of weed and flush it down the toilet. Everyone starts fighting, kids vs parents. Neighbor calls, we respond and get them separated, and my neighbor comes back and tells me, "You're not gonna believe this shit. One night when it was raining we were out and we saw this fire at this guy we know grows pot. This fire is huge, like it looks like a house burning, and it's 9 at night. So we go check it out. We roll up with our blues on and everyone just ducking scatters and we are thinking okay what's going on. Dude is burying a 30-foot fiberglass boat in his yard. Surrounded by pine trees. Goddamn pine trees. We're at least 50 feet away, and the heat coming off this thing is crazy. We can feel it with the windows open. As we're talking to this guy we found out the boat had a crack in the hull and he didn't want to sell it on Craigslist. As we're talking his son or some kid comes over with a stick with a marshmallow on it and starts toasting it. Fiberglass fire marshmallow doesn't equal a good time. We noped right out of there before we had to deal with it, but checked up the place every hour to see everything went up in a blaze of fiberglass and pine tree glory. I'm not a cop, but this is the best story of I don't frigging believe it that I'll ever have. It's long, but it was terrifying and then awesome. TLDR at bottom. It was July 4th, the first summer break of college. We were 19, living in rural Connecticut. Town is very uppity, no crime, all young, 40s to 50s, white professional families with kids. Basically, what you think of when you think Connecticut. One of our friends went to the University of North Carolina and was visiting for the week. So we did our usual thing. We hung out, threw a baseball around, frisbee, football, played some Halo, typical hangout day. Later on in the night we decide that we are going to go to Wendy's and bake out the car on the way there. We even had the finest in 19-year-old cigar brands, Black and Milds for each of us. University of North Carolina doesn't want to go because his flight home is early in the morning, so we were going to drop him off on the way. He decides he wants to eat because we baked the car and he's high now, so we turn around to head to Wendy's. Driver is going about 60 in a 45. I tell him to slow down, and his response is, "Dude, I don't want to look sketchy." Not even 10 seconds later, lights are on behind us. Cops pull us over. Fuck. Luckily we opened the windows a few miles back. Turns out they saw us do the K-turn to go to Wendy's and that's a sign of drunk driving, since it was 4th of July and they were looking for it. They followed us to make sure we were sober, I guess. So the cop comes to the window and of course we know him. He's the older brother of a high school classmate, and he's an unbelievable douchebag. I mean, huge freaking D-bag, to a degree I haven't seen since. Crazy power trip type. We knew we were screwed. And keep in mind, he knew all of us. Cop, what do we have here? So who's been talking? This yours, bro? Driver, no. Officer, we are just going to get Wendy's. You look like you've been there a few times yourself. Cop, funny guy, we got here. Got the munches, do you? Look, you even have an after dinner blunt. He grabs the cigar from behind my ear. I'm behind the driver. Me, yeah, and they came individually wrapped in plastic for sanitation in the purest flavor that only a proper after dinner blunt can provide. Cop, wow, we pulled over the comedy squad. Lucky me. He tells us to get out, pats us, and then starts searching the car for drugs. He pulls out a box with a scale, a vaporizer, dime bags, a bunch of herbs, actual herbs, not weed, and a homemade bowl we made out of a garden turtle ornament. His name is Yertle, obviously. Cop, what's this? Driver, it's mine, officer. Cop, looks like you're selling some buds, buddy. You know that's a felony? Driver, it's for the vape. Cop, what's a vape? Driver, it's that box in there. It's for aromatherapy for my asthma. That's a bag of tea next to it. Cop, tea, huh? More like tea. HC. Driver, good one sir. Hope you didn't pull a muscle coming up with that. Opens the bag. Smells it. Cop, what the fax is this sheet? Smell this. What does this smell like to you? Gives bag to partner. Partner, smells like raspberry tea sir. Driver, told ya dude. The part you put it in can only hold 1 gram of dried plant material, otherwise it burns, and it's bad for you. It came in a kit. Cop, that's the most faking ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Friend leans over to the guy's partner. Third friend, he's a huge douche isn't he? Guy starts laughing a lot, smiles and goes no comment. I have to be with him every night, so I'm not starting anything. And then nods to us. It was epic. The partner was trying to convince him to let us go, that they've wasted enough time, and that there's more important stuff to worry about than a couple of high kids going to get Wendy's, and he's taking it way too seriously. He was searching the car for another 15 minutes before he found a bowl in the map holder in the driver's side door, like the most obvious place ever. Arrests my buddy for possession and lets the 3 of us go. Now driver drives a manual, as do I and the friend that is flying home. I'm standing there going, oh shit, I'm going to have to drive us home because friend gets super jumpy and will definitely stall the car. Cop tells friend to drive the car because the arrested driver told him to. Not happy. He manages to get us moving. As soon as the car starts, I remember saying, thank God you didn't faking stall. I almost said something. And he goes, if you said something boof, I would vended your faking life. So last year I got dispatched to this house and the family there is not getting along. It's a bunch of drunk family members arguing. This chick is wasted, yelling at her boyfriend's aunt, and going on and on. We have history with her, like a lot of it. And she is on probation for some battery offenses and other stuff. Well, she's in her own home, and it's not a crime to be mad and drunk in your own house. So we leave. Get called back 30 minutes later. This time someone at the party threw a trash can full of beer cans over the fence, hitting a neighboring house and spilling cans into his swimming pool. He said it sounded like a woman. I described the probation lady's voice, and he's like, oh yeah, I think it was her. I go next door, knock on the door. All is quiet inside. They won't open the door. I bounce. Get called back an hour later. The aunt calls and saying the probation lady has beat her up and she needs medical attention. I head up there. First one on scene. Aunt is in the front yard bleeding from her nose, yelling at everyone standing on the front porch, crying. She looks like she got her ass handed to her. She's yelling that the girl on probation did it. I put cuffs on the probation lady and detained her in my car because she's known to resist and is on probation already for a similar offense. While putting her in the car, she looks at me and goes, Officer Blanco, she did to herself. I swear. I said, okay, I'll talk to you in a minute. Let me get some more officers out here to help out. She didn't resist at all. No fax you or anything like she normally does. I'm thinking this is odd. Her family is all like, hey, she didn't do anything wrong. Why is she getting arrested? Blah blah blah. I get this feeling shit could go south quickly. I yell back that I have to do an investigation and she's only being detained and not arrested yet. Officers show up, an ambulance shows up. I start to interview the aunt in the back of the ambulance. She basically tells me the probation girl kicked her ass and her nephew, the probation lady's boyfriend, dragged her out of the house by her hair and threw her on the ground. At this point I'm thinking I gotta arrest 2 people and all this. Well, an officer walks up and tells me I need to talk to the probation lady's daughter. She's 16, so she's smart enough to know what's up. She tells me the aunt did it to herself and she has video on her phone. She showed me the video, and I watched as this lady punched herself in the face several times, hard as fuck, then slammed her face into a wall, which busted her nose. Then she runs outside and dives headfirst into the front yard, like it's a slip and slide. I walked right over to my car and pulled open the door. Probation lady is begging, saying, I didn't do anything. I can't go to jail. I'll get a probation violation. Please don't do this. I looked her in the eye and I told her, "Get out of the car. I need those cuffs." She looks at me and smiles. I took the cuff off of her and walked right over and put them on the aunt. First and only time I was pulled over, I was home on leave for 2 weeks before I had to go back to Hawaii before going to Australia. It's like the 5th night I'm home, and because I didn't have a car I borrowed my mom's. I'm driving back home because my mom needed the car for work in the morning and it's getting late. Well, as I'm approaching the last right turn to get home, I suddenly remember that my mom told me to get gas so she wouldn't have to worry about it in the morning. I glance down and realize it's really low. I think about where it would be quicker to fill up, whip a U-turn, and drive 5 miles back the way I came, or make a left and drive a mile down the road. Well, due to the I need I turn left, I hit the road I need and proceed down it going 59 and a 55, no problem. Well, the town I was pulling into has no stoplights, however the speed limit drops to 45 as you enter. Well, I'm not paying attention to this as it's been over a year since I had driven in that area. So I go rolling through at 59. Well, one of the cops, as they always are, was waiting in his little spot and catches me going 59. Speeding is literally the only thing they get people for. Well, I see the lights on behind me and realize I'm indeed the one they are signaling, and now I need to find a place to pull over. The only place is the gas station. So I pull in and park next to a pump. Meanwhile, I'm freaking out thinking about how I'm about to get a ticket and miss out on going to Australia. On top of that, I remember that my parents both have concealed carry permits and there might be a firearm in the vehicle. So I'm losing it while I wait for the cop. Well, 2 cops walk up, one on each side, and I roll down the window and the one recites the whole "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And I respond, "Probably cause I was speeding." Well, he looks at me and goes on about me going 59 and whatever and asks me why. I tell him, because I needed gas. And now I'm super nervous because of all the people around and they probably think I have drugs or something. So I give the cop my stuff and he runs and finds I'm clean and lets me off with a warning. And I still have to pump gas. I get out of the car and go inside because I have to pay cash and know what everyone's thinking. Then I had to go back out and pump the gas with everyone still there. I got home and told my mom I filled the tank, but it took me 2 days to tell her I was pulled over and she laughed at me. I still went to Australia, found out that there were no firearms in the car and they don't leave any in any vehicle ever, and spent the rest of my leave wondering what I would have done if I had gotten a ticket. If you see job listings for places like American General Finance, those could very well be repo man jobs. A lot of places will start people working in the office as cashiers or similar, then give the ones with the aptitude a repo spot. For me, I started working in the warehouse of a place that sold housewares and financed in-house. Think rent a center or errands with in-house financing rather than a rental plan. After a while, I was given some repos to do, which worked out well for the company, and I became a full-time collector. From there, my interactions with other collection agencies and sleazy lawyers led me to some freelance car repo work for the title loan joints. Eventually, 3 other guys and I were running repos for the housewares company, several title loan places, and a few buy here pay here car dealers. We had more work than we could do. That was my path. But I've also known repo men who were hired off the street after answering an ad for outside collections. The jobs are there if you dig around. For the record, I work mostly in Midwest/Southern coal countries. Also, I don't think I could ever make it in a call center. That work is too repetitive for me.